Hello everyone, welcome back into MLS Digest. I'm Camille, your host, and we're here to preview Week 15 of MLS action. We're just going to be going over our best bets for the weekend's action, not going through every game this time around. It's a busy, congested schedule. Hopefully for Week 16 coming up, the other midweek, once again, I'll be able to get you guys previews on every single match. But here, we're just going to go over our best bets, and we'll have 6 of those for this weekend's action. Obviously, once again, a very congested schedule with U.S. Open Cup going on. The round of 16 just wrapped up, and the quarterfinals will be played in July, I believe. So that takes a little bit of those extra games out of hand, but still teams entering Week 15, a lot of them dealing with about 3 games in 7 or 8 days. And so, once again, this is that time period where the product of this league might not be, on full display. And we saw that in rivalry weekend as well, as the first midweek slate of the entire season was right before that hyped up rivalry weekend. And unfortunately, it didn't completely deliver on all fronts, with a lot of kind of tired legs and not as much entertainment, I guess, as we would have liked from a neutral standpoint. Before we get into our best bets for Week 15, please make sure to like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It goes a really long way towards growing the channel. Appreciate it, guys. So we start off with Seattle hosting Dallas. This is actually also the first game of Saturday's slate, and it's going to be our first best bet, but this one's going to be a 2-legger, so this is going to be the first leg of it. And I don't usually do too many of these, but since it is this congested schedule and rotation for sure in most cases of these games, I do like the Sounders here as a parlay leg in any case. Honestly, it's sitting at about between minus 230, minus 250 here. And, I think it's a solid price at this spot regardless. You don't usually get these types of prices in MLS, I guess, too often. But depending on the situation like this one, you do, because Seattle has been on a long road stretch, 4 out of the last 5 on the road, and they've come out relatively unscathed. They've actually been picking up form in the past, month and a half, regardless of injuries to Jordan Morris. Pedro de la Vega was dealing with some things earlier, but he's been back. Ferreira should be good to go. And Jackson Reagan also progressing, probably not going to make this game anyways, but regardless, Seattle had a full week of rest while many teams were in Open Cup action, such as Dallas. And, the Sounders weren't in Open Cup at all. So Dallas has 2 extra games under its belt as well, because they progressed from the round of 32 and then also just played the round of 16, where they went to extra time and then were eventually eliminated on penalties. And regardless of that, in league play, Lucho Acosta will be suspended because of card accumulation. And so he won't be here for this one. That's obviously their best player. Musa's still kind of been coming back from injury, and he played a lot of minutes in that Open Cup game as well. And then you also had a lot of players just playing decent amount of minutes, and the fact that, this extra travel to New York, not all the way to the West Coast in Seattle, the price is, as expected. This is a clear line, and Seattle should be a really big home favorite. And defensively, we know the Sounders are basically elite, but that offense still just picks up a little bit more on the road. So I think for Dallas, this is just kind of a throwaway game as well. They have to deal with this extra rotation, and this should just be a pretty easy win for the Sounders returning home now after a long stretch away. So that's going to be the first leg of this first best bet. So moving on to the second leg of this first best bet, it's Montreal hosting LAFC. And I'm going to take LAFC on the plus 0.5 or double chance. And that gets you to minus 107 odds when you pair it with that Sounders money line that we had. So Montreal, despite picking up its first win just a couple of games ago against NYC on the road, and then getting a draw against the Crew at home, got absolutely battered by Toronto last time out in MLS play in that rivalry game. An early red card, and they just completely collapsed from there on. But they've also had the midweek match up against the Canadian League team Forge in the Canadian Cup, Canadian Championship. And that's a 2-leg game, but they went down in that first one. Meanwhile, LAFC has had full rest. Yes, they do have to travel here from the West Coast. But regardless, full rest. The squad is fully fit. And they also won't have a midweek game coming up as well, while Montreal will after this weekend's matches, because LAFC as well next weekend has that one-off playoff game against Club America for the Club World Cup spot. And so they get the upcoming midweek off, and they should be fully fit for this one, and obviously shouldn't be rotating too much ahead of that next weekend's pretty big match when it comes to the money. But also, as you can see, LAFC in the past 5 and even further, it's very hard to beat this team. Yes, they haven't made it really pretty all the time in terms of even their wins, especially at home. But Bouanga's in just unbelievable form. He's been scoring a goal or assisting almost every single game now for the past 2 months. And Montreal as well played a lot of, starters / just first team players in that midweek match. On top of the fact that you have injuries to Caden Clark, Bryce Duke, and a bunch of other kind of injuries scattered throughout the squad. Also, Waterman's going to be out with a red card on that back line for Montreal. So the weather for this is expected to be really, really bad in terms of the rain, the downpour. And I think the line is pretty set in terms of the over-under, 2.5. And it could be a sloppy game in that sense. So I don't want to fully trust LAFC to win on the road, because we know that they do tend to get a little bit more defensively kind of fragile on the road. But at the same time, they shouldn't be giving Montreal only what would be, if they won this, its second win of the season. And so I think this is a really safe leg, even though LAFC is on the road here, because Montreal is dealing with so much and is just a far less healthy and deep team at the moment, that LAFC should at least get out of here with a point. And for the odds we're getting combining these two legs with the Sounders, I really like it for this kind of congested schedule type of situation. Moving on to our second best bet, it's Orlando hosting the Timbers. Both of these teams top 5 in their respective conferences. And while I do see why, this could potentially be a shootout, or why people would think this would be a shootout in terms of the goals here, I'm not really seeing it that way in this situation, just due to the congested schedules for both of these teams. Both these teams played an Open Cup action and both lost, but Timbers have to travel here. And in the past couple of weeks as well, you could see their attack has certainly regressed in terms of just finishing chances, gelling together and all of that. Meanwhile, their defense hasn't been all that bad. And both these teams sit at around kind of average in terms of the league table for XGA so far. Obviously, we know Orlando's attack is one of the best by the numbers as well, just also the eye test. But we've seen these types of games as well out of them, with Atuesta still out, and the replacement in midfield has stepped up for sure. The young kid, his name slips my mind, Gerbet, I think. But we've seen these moments that even sometimes when Orlando does look dangerous, they've had a lot of these 0-0 draws, and it's really been completely one way or the other in terms of their score lines. And both teams, like I said, in Open Cup action, they had to use a lot of energy, and in terms of the strength of their squads, they played a lot of first team starter minutes. And with the Timbers as well, Jonathan Rodriguez, even though he's been kind of getting playing time here and there, he hasn't made a start yet. And Neville said that he's still not expecting him to start yet, regardless of the rotation between the rest of these players. And so I think you're going to see a lot of tired legs. Timbers have this very long travel. And Orlando, although they've gotten to kind of stay in Florida the past month, basically, even though they traveled to Miami, that's really nothing. And they host this one again. Still, it's a lot of games in such a short amount of time, and they've done a fantastic job, because I think it's now, 11 or 12 unbeaten, maybe 10, I think, for Orlando after that statement win against Miami. But if you really looked at it in that Miami match as well, even though it was 3-0, they left it late in that last goal, and it was 0-0 until a literal assist from Galese right before halftime, where Miami's just caught sleeping. And I just don't think this Timbers squad is that same level of, just kind of incompetent in terms of a back line and the consistent awareness that you need to have. So really, some of these scorelines have been inflated for Orlando, and at the same time, I just think the under 3 here is at a really good value. I think this is a push at worst, and I just think on another day, this certainly could be a shootout, but can't really be betting with our heart here. As much as I would love to see the matchup, reversed or something later down the season. At the moment, it's just in these situations, even like I said in rivalry weekend, we just haven't seen a lot of goal scoring fests. We've seen a lot of snooze fest, 0-0s, and just kind of disappointing results. And this is one that I think just sets up to be just a little bit more cagey. Neither of these teams love to have the ball as well. They like to play out on the break, and I just don't think that is going to play out that way with the lack of energy, with the tired legs. They're not going to really be able to get into a track meet, which I think both teams would like, but it's just not going to happen here, in my opinion. Next up, it's a rematch of an Eastern Conference kind of top-tier clash between the Union and Miami. Union sitting in first, and they've been in such a good form ever since losing to Miami earlier, which isn't in their last 5 games, as you see here, but 5 wins technically out of the last 6 after in midweek they beat the only U.S. South side remaining, Pittsburgh Riverhounds, in Open Cup action. So now they're on to the quarterfinals. But Miami, meanwhile, coming off just an absolutely terrible month and a half, or even almost 2 months now, getting eliminated in Champions Cup and then also just in MLS play. As you can see, just 1 win in its last 5 matches. But they have the full week of rest here. They do have to travel, obviously, but getting embarrassed by Orlando like that, I think they're going to step it up offensively. This past meeting was a 2-1 Miami win in Miami, and that's usually, in terms of head-to-heads, you shouldn't just only look at that in terms of how a game might play out, but I think this is one of those where it's very clear. It's like almost one of those rivalry matches like we know with El Tráfico or Hell is Real. Like, there's always going to be goals. It's always going to deliver. And the Union, as we know, are also on the eye test just as good as they are analytically. And even though they might rotate a little, I think Bradley Carnell has actually been rotating, has been one of the best managers in terms of rotating his squad this year in MLS. And so you still see pretty strong lineups out of this team. Baribo didn't even play last match in Open Cup, and then he only got subbed down for the second half against Atlanta, in which he scored that winning penalty. So I think you're going to see Baribo and then Ura in this dual striker role this time, because Damiani has been playing a lot of minutes the past couple of games. But as the rest goes, I think the midfield should be fine. And I think this defense will slightly drop off because right now they only have 2 fit center backs who've been eating up a lot of those minutes. At the same time, Kai Wagner as well didn't play in Open Cup, so he will be fresh from an attacking standpoint. Obviously brings so much on just kind of set pieces and just distributing from that back line in terms of whipping in balls as well. But this defense should just fall off a little because of those only 2 center backs being fit, eating up those minutes. And then Miami as well. The defense has certainly fallen off. I think at the start of the season, they were a little bit more fresh and kind of getting away with some instances. But we've seen just their age is showing. They're not really consistent enough in terms of their setup, in terms of their kind of just awareness and communication in some moments, as we saw in that Orlando game where they just broke down on a couple of goals, especially that first one. And yeah, I think this is just one of those games that will deliver this weekend from a goal standpoint in what could be, like I'm thinking for the most part, another weekend that, is iffy in terms of the goals because of this kind of congested schedule. So I think with these odds for the over 3, we get a push at worst and hoping for one of these 2 teams to deliver that 4th goal. Moving on, it's a cross-conference battle between 2 teams towards the bottom of their respective conferences. And for this best bet between Kansas City and New England, I'm going with the under 2.5 at plus 110 odds. I think this is an unbelievable price, and for whatever reason, a lot of New England unders have been getting priced at basically even or just really, really playable odds, when a lot of their games this season have been pretty sweat-free unders, and that's just the nature of the way they play. And Kansas City doesn't really scare anyone, right? I mean, you see a lot of draws recently. They came back against St. Louis, but I think that says more about St. Louis. And this attack just isn't really fully, doing anything. I mean, Joveljic has been really the main bright spot from a finishing standpoint, but that doesn't mean they're really creating all that much. And at the same time, New England, as we know, is elite defensively, and they've really been picking up form. Obviously, as we see, unbeaten in their last 5 in MLS. They were in Open Cup midweek where they lost to the Fire. There was a heavily rotated team, though. So you should see a pretty full-strength lineup from a defensive standpoint. But in attack, actually, New England is going to be missing Campana. He got re-injured, and that really brings this attack down because you're probably going to see like Urruti back again as a number 9 when he's really not even that. And you're also still missing Langoni, who's probably still another week away with his own injury. And so really you don't have a true number 9. You really don't have one of your two sides of a true winger. And it's Carles Hill really pulling the strings, right, once again. And we've seen New England go on the road so many times and pull out these, whether it be 0-0s or wins where they shut out teams. And they've done it against really good sides such as Charlotte and even going or playing Orlando and NYC. Like, they've picked up these results, and this is one where I think it's going to be more cagey because of the fact that they have to travel here. They play the midweek, and so they're going to be just a little bit more on in terms of just that general tired legs. But they will have a full-strength lineup defensively, and we know that they're just going to sit in, eat up pressure, and Kansas City with the ball really is just uninspiring. And so this is one where New England could honestly steal all 3 points, but I don't think it's going to be a shootout either way because just the way tactically New England will make this game, it's going to be hard for Kansas City to break through, and New England at the same time won't really have the pace or that same level of quality, whether it be in counterattack or maybe in those small moments of possession that they do get, to really benefit and make this kind of a truly entertaining game, I guess you could say. So I think with the players New England is missing, plus the fact that we just know how they set up tactically and just how poor Kansas City has been offensively, like this price just doesn't make sense to me on a short week as well. Obviously, KC is well rested, but they have been coming back from a very long road trip at the same time, and still just only a few wins on the season to their name. So this really shouldn't be a shootout in my opinion, and I think we're going to see once again a lot of games be once again a little bit more dull as we kind of get through this slog of a schedule for most of these teams that aren't usually used to it. Moving on to a Western matchup where it's the Rapids hosting St. Louis now. The Rapids have a full week of rest ahead of this after finally getting back on track against RSL in that Rocky Mountain Cup with a 1-0 win. But it's just been a disappointing stretch overall recently for the Rapids, as you can see by those score lines before that win. Their games also at the same time haven't been high scoring, and that's been part of them not contributing as well. Meanwhile, St. Louis still just so long without a win now, and they are on tired legs, continuing to travel after back-to-back games in Minnesota where they lost 3-0 in MLS and then midweek 3-2 where they were actually up 2-1 but then lost in regulation. And so in this one, I'm going with the under here again, but this is an under 3 at -125. It's still, I think, a pretty good price, and we're getting that push protection in case there is just 3 goals. But St. Louis traveling, obviously on tired legs. They've invested a lot of these players, especially from an attacking perspective in terms of the minutes. And Colorado as well. They've been missing Navarro, their number 9, and now Bassett, it seems like, got re-injured in the last match. And so these are just question marks for a red. Both of these teams hate having the ball. They usually do not have possession. They'd rather be out on the break, and so I think that lends itself to just too much uncertainty in this game in terms of the preciseness of how these teams can kind of keep the ball and actually have these sequences of possession that are kind of lead to high danger attacks. So as well as St. Louis traveling on this long stretch, being on short rest in altitude really doesn't bode well for them. And this was another spot where I was potentially going to revert to maybe just picking the Rapids straight up. Because of their injuries, they just haven't really been convincing all that much from an attacking standpoint. I mean, they only got it done 1-0 against RSL, and so you're really kind of clutching at just these random things here and just kind of hoping for a result. So this is one where the Rapids probably should sneak away with a win due to the situation, but at the same time, I don't think either will get too many clear-cut chances, and you're really digging into your reserves here and kind of not your best players from an attacking standpoint. So even Zach Steffen, even though he might be out for this one, and he's been obviously elite in goal. I just don't think St. Louis is going to run out a good enough squad at the same time to really threaten this Rapid side. And when St. Louis does have to sit in, because they've done a lot of that, I think they've been okay when they've actually been in situations where they're not complacent. Obviously, they got complacent against Kansas City and just gave them the ball after they got the lead. But in situations where they're actually like, if it's going to be a tight game the whole way through, which I expect it to be, I just don't see this really being a back and forth game, and neither is really going to be comfortable or able to do much with any possession they do get, because it's just been so they just haven't had those types of games often. They haven't had these sequences, and so this is just another one where I'm completely fine with the price, and we're getting push protection for an under that should be relatively sweat-free. To wrap things up, we're moving on to Sunday slate. It has 2 games, but this is the nightcap. It's Sunday night soccer between what preseason should have been, or what everyone expected to be, 2 of the East contenders. But man, was I and everyone else wrong about Atlanta United, because they're sitting in 14th. Meanwhile, Cincinnati sitting in 2nd, and these two sides couldn't be further apart. But these teams did meet earlier this season in Cincy, and it was a draw. I think it was 2-2, and I think Cincinnati was rotating a little bit in that situation. But at the same time, regardless, look, Atlanta's form has been absolutely terrible, not just recently, but obviously this season. As I mentioned, they only have 2 wins. It's week 15, and they have 2 wins, and neither of these teams had midweek action in Open Cup. They're going to both be fresh. The only injury concern really for either is for Atlanta. Muyumba, as we know, got injured last game. He's going to be out for almost a month, it seems. And that's a big part of that defensive midfield, because the rest of that midfield, honestly, is pretty atrocious when it comes to just tracking back and just covering space in a defensive standpoint. So Cincinnati, on their end, it's really just about Kubo's fitness and how much he can go, but everyone else is fully healthy. And so for this final best bet, I'm going with Cincinnati on the draw no bet. Atlanta is favored here, and I just don't get it. I don't see this changing in this situation. I mean, obviously anything can happen in MLS with the parity, as we know, week by week, but how can you not take this line at plus 100 when you get this push protection for the best team in the league? Atlanta has only won 2 games at home. It was week 1 against Montreal in a shootout, and then where they had to come back against NYCFC from 3-1 down. And those are 2 terrible teams in the East as well. So as we look at it now, I just don't get this line. Like, Cincinnati is an elite team. It's very hard to beat this team anyways, and so I think at worst we get a draw here. But for Atlanta, obviously things are going to need to be shaken up over the summer with some sort of transfers, whether that be in or out. But it just seems like no matter what Dyla does or maybe tries to change in terms of this formation, these players just aren't meshing, and the attitude and the energy just isn't there. So Atlanta being at home doesn't really scare me, because while it should be a fortress, this form and from seasons past, this arena, this stadium has just not been, it hasn't really been a tough environment to play in, because the results haven't been coming, and the fans, the turnout has just been, kind of responding to that. And so, yes, it is Atlanta at home, and that's going to be tough for any team, any road team in MLS. But since we're getting this draw no bet, I mean, Cincinnati has every chance to win this game, and they should be the favorites. I mean, on a neutral field, they would be clear favorites. And so, just the fact that Atlanta is home doesn't really scare me on this one. This is going to be Sunday night soccer, prime time. Like, I think Evander and Denke will show up. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Make sure to like the video down below and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next video ahead of week 16.